They changed the course of the conflict in Syria and the fate of the Assad regime. But the Russian military's intervention there now appears to be coming to an end.
Министру обороны, начальнику генерального штаба приказываю приступить к выводу российской группировки войск в пункты их постоянной дислокации. Родина ждет вас, друзья. В добрый путь.
Similar praise came from Bashar al-Assad. He and his regime appeared to be on the verge of collapse just before the Russians arrived in September 2015, just in time to stop Daesh's onslaught. At the time, Daesh controlled over half of 50% of the country and had regime forces on the run. Russian air power stopped their campaign in its tracks. To date, Kremlin says it's carried out 92,000 airstrikes, killing 58,000 terrorists. The air power has also been critical in breaking Daesh's grip in urban areas, particularly Aleppo. Now the Syrian regime controls over 55% of the country, while groups opposed to it control another 25%, as Daesh hangs on to a mere 3%. But it's come at great human cost, as ordinary Syrians continue to suffer the most. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says the airstrikes have also killed 10,000 civilians. That's a toll Assad seems at peace with.
How can you liberate the civilians in those areas from the terrorists? Is it better to leave them under their supervision, under their oppression, under their fate defined by those terrorists, by beheading, by killing, by everything, but not having state? Is that the role of the state, just to keep and watch? You have to liberate, and this is the price sometimes. But at the end, the people are liberated from the terrorists.
The campaign has also boosted Russian influence in the region to arguably its highest level since the fall of the Soviet Union, with leaders lining up for an audience at the Kremlin, all at the cost of America. The role of the United States in the Middle East has diminished since former President Barack Obama refused to take military action against Assad. Despite his use of chemical weapons on civilian areas, it seemed to embolden the regime to continue such tactics. Obama's stance infuriated close allies such as Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the UAE. The Trump administration has tried to turn that around with increased support to the YPG-backed SDF alliance. But that has sparked outrage from NATO partner Turkey, which says the group wants to carve out an independent Kurdish state. Meanwhile, Russian troops have now begun arriving back home. But Moscow says it will continue to maintain its airbase in Latakia province and its naval facility at Tartus, just in case Daesh returns. But is it actually positioning to become the region's new and permanent policeman? Shoaib Hassan, Newsmakers.
To discuss this, I'm joined from Moscow by former Russian diplomat Vyacheslav Matusov, and with me here in the studio is Sinan Hatahet. He's a senior associate fellow at a Shark Forum. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Vyacheslav Matusov, let me begin with you, sir. So Putin has said mission accomplished. What exactly has he accomplished in Syria?
Well, accomplished the war against terroristic groups. Main troops were destroyed and disorganized, and so I think he means that the rest of job can be very easily made by Syrian Arab army. That's why the presence of Russian troops in this quantity that they have during the battle, main battle against terrorism, is not needed practically. And Russia is undergone the criticism in the West and in the East that it is an occupying country. So he shows absolutely clear that Russia is not occupying Syria. Russia is supporting Syrian people to withstand against terroristic attacks and to keep its territorial integrity. because it is the main task is solved, and other job like destroying different fragments of terroristic area in different places of Syria is not demand a Russian presence in such kind. So, but Russia stay in Syria in spite, and he told that if they repeat their attack on Syria in future, they will meet a great new attack that will destroy them.
Yes, I want to bring in Sinan because the Russians will maintain 2 military bases in northwestern Syria. So Sinan, do you agree with that? The Russia's achieved its objectives. It defended Assad and it fought what Matusov calls terrorist groups. So it's time to leave.
Well, as Mr. Putin was making the mission accomplished speech, the Russian air forces were still active in southern Aleppo and conducted over 70 air raids in the last 48 hours. Reality is that this speech is mostly for domestic reasons, is to prepare also the campaign for the next election, presidential election in Moscow. The war has maybe changing and adopting a new let's say, modus operandus. The ISIS is not longer in charge or controlling large areas in eastern Syria. However, it still has some residuals. They are in small groups and they have different weapons, and their threats still exist.
Okay, so I want to talk about where the war is right now and what's happening in a few moments, but let me ask Vyacheslav Matusov about the point that you made, that this might just be for domestic purposes. There's an election coming up. He wants to show himself as a strong man, as a victorious man, just like George W. Bush when it came to Iraq. Mission accomplished. That's all he wants to do. It's for domestic purposes. What do you think, Ambassador Matusov?
I don't think that the comparison with Mr. Bush is correct, because Mr. Bush came to Iraq, destroyed the country, and after that they sent accomplished. It wasn't accomplished. After his interference to Iraq, aggression, it was 1.5 million were destroyed, of Iraqis. But now, of course, in Syria, the situation is different absolutely, because the main forces of Islamic groups are destroyed, really. And some troops are fighting till now. Even today, some hours ago, I received an information from Damascus, where a neighborhood to Yarmouk camp, Palestinian camp, was captured by Daesh, by troops, by some military people. And the battle is going on not far from Damascus. Of course, this battle is continuing, but it is not strategically have such importance that demand a Russian active role in military operations.
So let me ask.
I think it finished with Russian presence.
Okay, so let me ask Sinan. There's a feeling from Moscow that Daesh would not have been defeated. Yes, they're still around, right? They're still around, but they're weakened. So let me rephrase. Daesh would not have been severely weakened as they are now without the Russian intervention.
And I agree with this, point of view. Exactly, the Russian intervention in Syria has a revival kind of impact on the regime. They have been able to conduct a large series of operations in eastern Syria, and this wasn't possible without the intervention of Russian air forces. However, they haven't intervened against ISIS only. They have also intervened against the moderate or the mainstream opposition as well. So I think that it is a bit too early to declare victory. There is still a lot of efforts to be put on the table in order to consolidate and to this, initial victory, and also to bring stability to the country. And I think this is exactly what Russia is main priority right now, is to bring stability at any price in Syria.
And if we have to take stock, Sinan, if we look at the Russian involvement from the moment they began supporting Assad, let me ask you, would the rebels have been able to defeat Assad and oust him if Russia didn't get involved in this war?
No, I don't think so. I think that rebels and the regime would have reached a stalemate. Of course, the opposition was in a much better situation than the currently is. However, the situation in Syria was stagnating, and now it is not anymore, at least in favor of the regime. That's not necessarily in favor of the country, however, because the reasons why the revolution and the uprising started are still there. The regime is still corrupt. The regime is still responsible for the death of hundreds of thousands of people, and not to speak of millions that have been pushed out of their habitat.
Yeah, so Vyacheslav Matusov, when we look at the Syrian war as it stands right now, yes, there are some terrible actors all over the place, and many groups have done unspeakable things. But according to the best available estimates, the Assad regime is still largely responsible for the highest death toll, proportionally, right? So more than 300,000 people have been killed. The vast majority of those deaths have come from the barrel bombs and the soldiers and the airstrikes and so on. Was it worth it? Or does it feel a little bittersweet for you as a Russian that your government supported Assad while he did? Yes, he was fighting. Amongst those he was fighting, there were some bad guys. But is it bittersweet for you that he did some unspeakable things during this war and you supported him? And you yourself did some unspeakable things in places like Aleppo.
I don't think that Russia acknowledged such kind of approach to Syrian events, because Russian view on what happened in Syria during 7 years, that Syria was the subject of aggression from the militarized groups from all over the world. According to the previous figures, something about 50 till 100,000 of jihadists came to Syria to fight Syrian regime, and they were supported by the United States of America. And we don't consider that they appeared in Syria, from the air. On the contrary, it was military, politically, informationally enjoyed support of U.S. government. And because they were main goal to change governing system in Syria, to remove Bashar Assad as a president of Syria, they were obvious goals of American here. And they were using Daesh, Nusra, all other groups, military groups, they considered themselves
Let me ask you then,
Islamic, to fulfill American goals.
It's good to understand that, and I do understand that the Russian perspective is the Americans were pushing these groups. The Americans themselves say they were not. But let me ask you, if 7 years on, it's still clear to you, you can honestly tell me that you feel there's no difference between Daesh, between Nusra, between the Free Syrian Army, and all the other groups. Can you honestly tell me that they're all the same?
Well, we differ. We differ. Free Syrian Army, first of all, because we don't consider it a terroristic organization. But Nusra and Daesh are registered in the United Nations as a terroristic groups. Okay, Nusra changed its name. It's
no, so you agree with the Americans?
That's it appeared, but it's not. Doesn't.
No, certainly. So you sound as if you agree with the Americans, because the Americans see Nusra or HTS or anything that came from Al Qaeda, and they see Daesh as terrorist groups, and they see the others as legitimate rebels. So, I mean, it's surprising to me here because it seems as if you agree with the American position here and not the official Russian position.
Well, I don't think about official Russian position because I look at facts. If Americans joined Kurdish military groups in Raqqa to move them to the Al-Bukamal to be soon than Syrian or Arab army. That means that they agreed with Daesh groups. They opened the road them to come first before Syrian army. I think our opinion that it was, and I'm privately, personally, I believe in it. That America used these old people. Abu Bakr Baghdadi, he was in prison, American, between 2005 2010. And he came out of the prison, and after 2-3 months, arranged this
but they were probably,
state.
I mean, it's
the
possible.
Same Abdel Hakim
but there's another interpretation, Mr. Matusov. It's possible that they tortured the hell out of him in Abu Ghraib, and that's why he decided to become the leader of ISIS, rather than that they controlled him in prison. Isn't that more reasonable, that he was tortured in Abu Ghraib?
No, I don't think so, because being in Abu Ghraib, for example, famous pictures are known to all the world. It's very, very disastrous. And if anyone finds himself in this prison, he will accept any offer. American government can suggest.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, interesting to hear that
that's
from you.
why.
Okay,
that's
okay, fair enough. Can I move on to Sinan? I just want to ask him about the Americans here. Over the past couple of years, have we seen the Americans effectively sidelined? So we're seeing the Russians saying, mission accomplished. It suggests that the war might be winding down on their terms. We've seen Astana with the Russians, the Iranians, the Turks, and so on, not having the Americans at the table. Is the American influence completely diminished at the moment in Syria?
No, I don't believe so. They do enjoy a lot of influence over the SDF forces in northeastern Syria. SDF is now in control of around 27% of the Syrian territory, and it's not any territory. It's a very strategic on the Iraqi borders, with most of the oil reservoirs in the country, as well as also the Euphrates Valley and the larger agricultural lands. So United States is just priorities have been shifted since the chemical attack in Eastern Ghouta, and what they have witnessed from the regime of the Russians. They have somehow turned a blind eye to the Russians and the regime afterwards, and they have concentrated on defeating ISIS. And I believe that Russia and the United States have been, I wouldn't say maybe in cahoots, but have been cooperating in Syria for the last 2 years. They have been fighting side to side against the ISIS. Of course, there are differences. Of course, they are maybe not agree on all issues, but SDF itself have recognized around Bukamal the cooperation with the Russian air forces, as well, of course, at the IC, the international coalitions.
Yeah, that's a good point. Strong American influence in the north, especially through the SDF. Ambassador Matusov, so when we look at Vladimir Putin, we see he was in Syria, then he goes to Egypt and he meets with Sisi, Abdel Fattah Sisi. What does that tell us? Stronger Russian influence in Egypt, stronger Russian influence in the region. What is Russia's Middle East policy?
My opinion, Russia has no intention to create any military presence in Middle East. The situation around Hmeimim base and Tartus base shows that Russia diminishing its military presence and doesn't like to broad it to Egypt, to Libya, to Sudan, or any other place. Because, my opinion, Russia plans to establish, to create regimes, local regimes, who will defend effectively by themselves.
I see.
That is their main goal of Russian policy in the Middle East. Not to be instead of Syria, not instead of Egypt, not instead of Libya, but to help Libyans, Egyptians, Syrians, Iraqis, and other nations to stabilize the situation and stabilizing the situation in the Middle East. It is the main goal of Russian Federation.
Right. And
I
guess,
reject
yes,
any,
certainly.
even from Russian side, declarations that Russia is going on to interfere in Libyan internal affairs. No, I'm sure that is not.
Okay. And I guess everybody wants to stabilize the Middle East, but I guess stabilizing the Middle East means different things for different countries, whether it's the United States or Turkey or Iran or Russia. Interesting times indeed for Syria and the region. I have to move on. So this is where I thank you, Vyacheslav Matusov and Sinan Hatayat. Thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers.
Thank you.